Welcome again to the First Gen Professionals as Influencer Series. This is our August offering of this series. Certainly, we will continue to offer this. Just to let you know, it is being recorded so that folks can visit this if they need to. We'll be uploading it. LT, don't we upload this on the Empowering First Gen's Facebook group?
Yes, ma'am.
Very good. So you can, once this is released on recording, we'll put it on that site, as well as you can look for the other recordings that have been there as well. So my name is Mary Wallace, and I serve as the Assistant Vice President of Student Affairs at the University of Alabama at Birmingham. I'm also a very proud new grandmother, so that's something new since last we met. I would also say that another proud achieving moment for me and about 14 of my closest colleagues now is the publication of the First Gen Professionals book through the NASPA Publishing Company. And it is that book that really led LT and I to think about creating this influencer series because certainly we know in the First Gen nomenclature, a lot of people use deficit language, and we thought this was a great way to frame up what First Gen professionals bring to the table through their influence. And so we welcome you here. We know that our groups are different sizes every time, but whoever needed to be here is here. And so we honor your time with us, and we want to hear from you. Today, I get a real pleasure to introduce Dr. James Winfield, who is the Associate Dean for First Year Experience, General Education and Retention Strategies. That's a big old title at Southern New Hampshire University's Global Campus. He certainly has lots of things that he's done throughout his career, mostly or a lot of the times focused on First Gen, Trio, etc. And one thing, as I'm reading his bio, I thought, wow, I love him already, of course, is that he is a Marvel Cinematic Universe fan, and so am I. And he's an incredible person. Also, he reigns from Birmingham, Alabama, which connects him as a colleague and friend for life. So I want to turn over the mic to Dr. James Winfield, and let's start our discussion.
Yeah, well, thank you, Mary, and thank you, LT and Lear, for the invite. And I'm just really happy to be here. I really have immersed myself in First Gen work. And what's cool and kind of brings us full circle is that La'Tonya, that's on the call, was kind of there with me in the beginning of when I started to truly unpack this identity. I was a newer professional, well, not newish. I've had a couple of years under my belt back then, but I was new to the realm of student success, access, and having recently worked in TRIO programs, and really began to lean more into my identity. At my previous institution, my alma mater, that I love dearly, I really didn't have the opportunity to really share that or really understand that I was first generation. But upon, great mentorship and working relationships, and then the trial and error that we all go through, I was able to carve a path that was very unique for my family. And it's just been a cool roller coaster since then. So just happy for the opportunity and looking forward to the conversation and dialogue today.
Very good. Well, today we're going to talk about social capital. And the first person I thought about, even though I've never met James in person, we've had lots of LinkedIn conversations. I think that he likes everything I put on LinkedIn about First Gen professionals, and I really appreciate him. But I thought about James, just his story, and and what he has leaned into his experience with. Social capital was a big theme of the professional, first gen professionals book. And he talks my language. So he's going to talk a little bit about Dr. Yoso and navigational capital, especially with our first gen. So James, tell us a little bit more about social capital and why that's an important topic to talk about with first gen professionals.
Yeah, yeah. I think with social capital, you're starting to hear it more being spoken into the concept of, everyone has it. We have some form of capital that we bring to the table. And, Mary, you mentioned this non-deficit framing that we're really getting into. And it's like we've heard the challenges ad nauseam, right? So what are the building blocks to really strong points of pride that this population possess? I think this kind of started for me as I started to dive more into my dissertation work. And my dissertation was on examining the career self-efficacy of low-income first-generation college students enrolled in the TRIO program. And through that's when I was able to really see this come to fruition and hearing these empowering narratives from students about they were just tired of the deficit language and that written that actually came out. They were talking about the various barriers that they encountered, which I didn't focus on that so much, more so the positive, but they brought it up and they mentioned how individuals would say, oh, you're in what major? Oh, that's hard. I don't know if you can do that. Those types of words and phrases that you hear can be very discouraging, and they've had enough of that within their lives. So it was really cool to see how they lean more into positivity, how they sought affiliations, groups, friends who were there to uplift them and to challenge them. So that was kind of the catalyst for me to really, look into this a little bit more. And then, of course, utilizing different experiences and theoretical frameworks that I've been exposed to. The appreciative advising framework was part of some work that I utilized when I worked in student success some years ago, and then it's employed now with the peer mentors that I work with. I really try to impart that into them on how to coach and motivate students, and leaning into Yaso's work on cultural wealth. And as I mentioned, when I started to really read more about like Yaso's work and understand that, what you were saying is like essentially everyone has something that they bring, and it's at different levels. And sometimes we try to enrich and improve different areas of capital, but we bring it there. I was really speaking my language, and I've been following that ever since and integrating it into the fabric of my work with professionals, my students, my employees that I work with and collaborate with, getting them to understand that as well, because it's easy to lean into what's wrong. It's easy to lean into what's different as deficit. Difference should not be deficit. And that's how we need to continue to move if we want to make sure that we're in a society that embraces one another for those beautiful differences that we all have.
Different should not be deficit.
I felt that. Yeah.
I could too. I was like, whoa.
And
Those
just
are like the little gems that we just cling to right there, James.
just real quick though, James. I think you switched headsets, and the first one you had, actually the sound was better.
Okay.
It's a little muffled right now.
Got it. Okay. I can make that switch.
All right.
You'll let James make a headphone switch.
But yeah, let's keep it going. It was fantastic. Great overview.
Yep. So that idea of difference should not be deficit. I mean, we see that in a lot of intersectionality as well. And, we do know that the first gen identity intersects with a lot of identity as well. And so I'm sure this is resonating. I know it's resonating for me as a first gen, low income going into college students. So
Yeah.
thanks for giving us that little nugget. James, what do you think is the question we need to start with the group? Like what kind of stories do we need to hear tonight from our
Mm,
attendees?
yeah. So as far as, questions, I think you kind of start with, of course, like where you are and you kind of go backwards and then like reflect. I know for me, it's thinking about those moments where you kind of were able to, it's like the light switch kind of went off a little bit. And that happens for different points in life. So for me, I think about the deficit part, and I'm just going to frame a story quickly to kind of give some context on this. So I went to Auburn University in Alabama, and as Mary mentioned, born and raised in Birmingham, Alabama. I'm now a resident of Texas. But with that, I went to Auburn University, and I was one of very few from my high school that decided to make that jump to that institution in the state. And it was maybe like myself and two others, one guy that was a little bit older than me, another classmate who decided to come a little bit later as well. But uh, at Auburn, there was a group of students that was like from I guess a feeder school, you would call it. Like there was a high population of students and peers, some friends of mine that went to a neighboring high school that came to the institution. It was a whole herd of them, and we kind of we became friends, and commune over the fact that we were from the same city and trying to just better ourselves. And I do remember a point in time where we kind of assembled in this area on campus. We would do that in between classes, and there was one guy there who was just joking around, talking to everyone, and then he was going around asking like, where was everyone from? He's like, oh yeah, I know you're from this high school. I know you're from that high school. And James, what high school did you go to? And I told him that I went to Inslee High School, which I am very proud of. And I went to Inslee, and he was like, oh, you barely made it here. And just at that moment, like one of my good friends looked, and he was just like, hey man, like that wasn't cool at all. And a few people kind of chuckled a little bit, but they knew me, and it just wasn't, they were like, that doesn't speak to James or where he's from or whatever. But this guy made that statement. So anyway, that sat with me. And you're talking about the epitome of imposter syndrome, for someone to tell you that you almost didn't make it there, right? Um, at this time, I know that there were people, questioning their worth and everything else. And, being at a large institution like this, it was a bit of a shocker and culture shock for many of us who were in a predominantly Black school system. But I took it as a challenge. I'm very much a person who likes to lean into Du Boisian ideology and actually going on the other side to really understand how to survive and thrive in a new environment. Fast forward, it's my senior year. I'm walking up, talking to my advisor about my minor, getting my last few classes checked off on my curriculum sheet. I go down the stairs and I walk into that same individual, and he looks at me. He's like, "Wow." He's like, "James, so good to see you." And I'm like, "Yeah, man, good to see you as well." And he states that he observes me and was like, "Wait a minute, you're a senior now." And I was like, "Yeah." Turns out he had his bouts and issues, and then was like cycling through and cycling out. And he was like, "Man, I should have been focused like you." And I was like, "Whoa." And
Yeah.
then, I shook hands, wished him well, and walked down the stairs. And I was, relishing in the fact that I was a few months from graduation. That's not to throw that in that guy's face or anything. I still keep up with them. But those moments, those full circle moments, like I remember leaving that building, pausing and being like, I'm almost at the finish line. Right. So it was so much power in that. And eh, I'm glad that I was able to like recognize it at that moment, but it's
Yeah.
something that I bring up now, to where I was made to feel less than, that I did not almost as if I didn't have the social capital to bring to the table at this respective institution. I got involved, became a solid student leader, and did a lot of good things on my campus, and actually got my first job at my alma mater. But just framing all of that really sums up that. So just wanted to throw that out there as a little anecdote.
I mean, that's an incredible story. And I wrote it down, full circle moments. Like that is, I think that's part of the narrative of being an influencer. And I love that your friend like kind of surrounded you with his capital in that moment. Um, and that you were surrounded by people through your Auburn experience who really told you more truth to you, spoke truth to you versus using deficit language. And I wonder if there are others on the call who can share sort of their full circle moments, those moments where maybe they were told they were not going to thrive, but they did. And you had those full circle moments. Hey, Sarah, are you going to share your full circle moment?
Well, I don't know if it's full circle, but I actually like choked up when you were talking. I just remembered how I went to a state university, but it was close by a private university that my best friend from high school was going to. And I went and visited her there. And it was probably like our sophomore year. And we were in like the parking lot, and these guys were passing by who she knew. And she was like they were calling out to her saying, "Hey, what are you doing?" And she said, "Oh, this is my friend. This is my best friend. She goes to Millersville State University." And the kid turned to me and goes, "So you're stupid."
Oh, people got some rudeness.
And I, like, as you're saying that story, James, I started crying because I'm a very emotional person, but also I forgot that had happened. And I remember, like, even now I'm actually like in the process of applying for jobs, and I definitely have this like little bit of a crisis of, I know that I have accomplished so much being first gen professional, first gen student, all of that. But, I'm like unsure of myself because I didn't go to some fancy school, and I'm competing on a national scale now. I've been working for 15 years. I'm very talented, I think. But, just still having that narrative of you don't have that, what's the word? It's not caliber. There's another word. But that like credibility is just, it really impacts like the way I think about myself as a professional. And I know it's wrong, but like, wow, I had not put that together until you told that story. So thank you. I appreciate it.
Well, thank you for sharing, and know that we all have credibility, right? So that's whatever energy is out there that tries to profess that's just that's not true at all. And I think about, you talked about this fancy university. I mean, which university is, right? I mean, we all aspire to get, to have, earned our degrees and have a higher education. That is a distinction in itself, right? You think about the percentile of individuals that go through and don't complete. That is credible in itself. So I would say try to dismiss that. I think we've developed this a lot. There's these hierarchies, and we do it to boast about certain whether it's an institution, individuals, accolades. And what that does is that tends to minimize some of the other contributions that take place across the landscape. So just wanted to throw that out there.
And how rude could people be to not know you and to make assumptions about you based on a school that you're going to. Many of us went to regional schools. I went to a regional school. Um, none of that matters in the end. It's almost kind of like they say, stop putting your GPA on your resume at some point because nobody cares what your GPA was, and you graduated and you deserve to be in the job market. And I would hire you in a New York minute.
Call me because I'm looking. So
there you go. Look, I got some openings.
we'll talk. Yeah. Thank you all. I appreciate it. Yeah.
I have a story to share that I'll tie it directly to social capital, James. Writing my memoir, and I had forgotten, I had probably suppressed this encounter I had in undergrad where I had won a Shakespeare essay contest, y'all. So I was an English major and was like encouraged to do this by one professor. And then the professor who signed the letter saying, that I got this award, I went to him super excited because to me, this was like validation that I should get my Ph.D. in English. And I went to him and I said, oh, I want to talk to you. What grad program should I, apply for? And he said to me, like, are you sure? You sure you want to go to grad school? It's really hard. I was like, no, I'm sure. And he said to me, well, you did win, but the competition wasn't as good this year. And I had completely forgotten about that story until I was telling my friend Martha about it. And one thing that's interesting about that, the same professor who's basically discouraging, who didn't know me, just like said, didn't know my story, didn't know anything about me, just like, oh, the competition wasn't good. Not only was he a Shakespeare scholar, his father was a Shakespeare scholar, his grandfather was a Shakespeare scholar. All three of them had gone to Ivy League institutions. And so that's the social capital part you're talking about, Jane. Like, I couldn't compete with that part of it, right? There's no way. A grandparent with a PhD? Come on now, from Yale or whatever? That's what I was up against as a first-gen student. My grandfather was a mailman and my grandmother got paid under the table to take care of kids. So in that moment, my social capital was pretty low. And I think, but I've obviously acquired a lot of social capital since then. But you do wonder what is in people's heads. Like, why would you ever say that to a student?
And I think that it's really powerful when you're in a space that you're not totally sure you belong. And, when that happened to me, it was so long ago. I didn't know what a first generation student was. I had no idea it was a thing because this was, in 2007 or 8 that happened. And nobody was telling me like, oh, you feel this way because of, you don't have the institutional knowledge and the generational knowledge in your family. And so when you feel that, but you don't know, and then someone says something, like those things are so powerful because you're creating that narrative that you don't have anything. Like I didn't have anything to fight it. I was like, yeah, I guess I'm not. That's, and I knew he was just being rude, but it's these things that like, those words matter so much when you don't know that you don't even have that identity, so it's wild.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think about with what you're saying, Sarah, and even to LT's point, like sometimes you don't develop or strengthen that sense of agency until you've had experience under your belt. And that's when you're able to just kind of come into your own and reflect on the situation and be like, whoa, that is what happened. And it just doesn't quite come together until later on. But I think about the notion of individuals where we have to like, okay, grit and bear it, keep pushing through. I think that that's a common thing among first gen students is to just, really just stay focused and just keep going. Don't pause. And I think that's why we see a lot of fatigue with systems and work and exhaustion, and it's manifested, even harsher in the midst of the pandemic. But we really have to be attuned to that and have those spaces to where we can share with trusted individuals, because I think the vulnerability is far more respected now, but still in some essence I'm still a bit guarded. I'm not even going to front about it. I know LT knows this about me. Like there are certain circles that I am in where I can share more of myself, right? And as I've gotten older, I've been able to just do it unapologetically, right? But you just have to find that space to where you can do that and own the capital that you bring and make sure others know that it's present.
Well, and as I'm listening to these stories, every instant, LT's story, James's story, Sarah's story, there was an opportunity for someone to use their capital in the moment, and they did not. And it reminds me um, that as influencers, that our social capital that's been built over the years to open doors, relationships, etc., that we stand on the shoulders of our parents, caregivers, etc. They opened a door for us. I know that my parents did. It's not a monolith, so there are things that happen to first gen students in that way. But I almost feel like it is my responsibility to use my social capital for my children, for trio students right now, for first gen students right now, for first gen professionals right now, for minoritized students right now. I mean, there's a lot of capital that we have as influencers, as first gen students and first gen professionals. And it reminds me, all three of those stories, that I don't want to be that person. And so, anyway, I don't know how you've experienced opening doors for others. Is there a story out there that we can talk about how you've used your social capital to influence others?
Yeah, I'm trying to think of like one. Yeah, I have one. um, there are, I guess, several small moments now. Like, here, you and I were talking about, the LinkedIn connections and whatnot. And I've had fraternity brothers, younger fraternity brothers, individuals reach out to me and just say, hey, I see you're in the field of higher ed. I'm just trying to learn more about the field. And I'm like, oh, well, I appreciate that. Um, but for me, I learn from them because it gives me a pulse of what's happening from their lens and perspective in the industry now. But really, just to develop more of a friendship in a way, is what I try to view it as, and just honestly lift as you climb, because just being quite candid, I mean, I'm a black male in this space, and finding others that have done it, sometimes it can be a bit discouraging when you've seen some obstacles that some have faced, and you're just like, okay, how do I navigate that? But one in particular I will bring up is a young man. um, he he was a student leader. Well, he wasn't a leader at this time. He was just a student uh, at my first job at Auburn University. Really dynamic young man. I remember he came to my office and he was looking to be involved in one of our freshmen. I know that's an antiquated term, but that's what it was referred to then. First year leadership groups, and through that. Was just very interested and sought my insight, like wanted me to review the application, and I gave him feedback, and I was like, man, he should have this. I'm really hoping that he gets this. We had this tradition, no, have a tradition. It's known as call outs, where it's very cool for the individuals that get it. They stand on this huge archway and behind one of the historic buildings, and they call out the names of the individuals who have been selected for respective groups. And the leadership of the groups are the ones that say the names, and they're kind of looking down, and everyone's standing on the yard, and then they can walk up the stairs, they hug, and it's just this huge ceremonious moment. I've had it a couple of times with being an orientation leader and other things. This young man wasn't afforded that in that moment. And I remember them calling out the names. I was listening keenly for his name and then a couple of others. And to see the handful of students, all of them make it except for him, it tugged at my heart. So I remember seeing him walk across campus, deflated. I ran to him, gave him my card, and he came back to my office and was like, what? He was like, I really wanted this opportunity. I don't really know what else to do. And I was like, hey, there's actually a new group that's being formed to really increase the engagement for first year students. We realized that it was a very like elitist type format that we had, but also there was another tier that we could have engaged in that engaged more in service. I was like, I really think you should apply. So talked to him about it, and then eventually he listened. He turned in his application. The director of that program came to me and immediately spoke to me about the first impression that he made on her. That was the last I heard. I left the institution, and for about 3.5 years later, I get an email, and that email was from this student saying that you might not remember me, but you gave me your card after the call outs, and then at that time, you just don't know this, but I was really battling like, do I belong at this place? Is it for me? I just failed a class, all these different things. It was a long list of things that he encountered. And turns out he was in the senior year, and he became director of that same initiative that he was that he put that application in for. And then like in his signature line, I saw like 3 or 4 leadership posts. And I was like, wow. And then at the end, I saw Gates Millennium Scholar. And I was like, whoa, okay. So he's a first gen student. Had all of these things going for him, and we could have lost him at the institution because just that one moment of disengagement just like almost soured him. So what I say in that is just leverage your capital. You never know, it could be a little moment, right?
That's right.
Me pulling him to the side, giving him my card, and then actually like meeting with him in my office, talking to him for a bit, and then using that capital to affirm with that director, like, hey, he did the work on his own, but I was there to say, yeah, he's a pretty stellar student.
Open the door. James, that's a great story of using your social capital, opening doors. I always think about that phrase, as you rise, you reach back. That's probably not the right phrase. That's kind of paraphrased, but it makes me think of that. Oh,
Yeah, that lift as you climb.
Lift as you climb. That's exactly. There you go. Does anybody else have a story of you lifting as you climb? I know we haven't heard too much from Maria and Jose. I want to give you an opportunity to insert your stories too.
Sure, I can jump in real quick. One of the things that you all reminded me of, and I think it's something that I kind of had known for a long time. I'm in my late 50s. I've been working for a long time. So I was a first gen student back in the 80s. So and I just some of the research that I did just completed with my dissertation was focusing on first gen professionals. And so one of the things that kept coming up a lot, and I kind of knew this also, and I think in college I remember knowing that there's certain things that we should be doing. So like like all of the students, the professionals who I interviewed, they all knew they should be talking to their professors. They all knew that they should be connecting with their supervisors, but for a majority of them, they just never did. And so one of the things that came out was, one, they didn't feel a connection, and two, they didn't know what to talk about. So they would go in, talk about their class, their paper, their midterm or whatever. But once that conversation was over, that was it. They didn't know how to have those conversations. And it was the same thing that was repeated once they became professionals. And so they knew that they were supposed to connect with their supervisor. And I think this has been my experience as well, is they were lucky if they had a good supervisor, good meaning more than just the boss and telling them how to do their job, but really look for them professionally, especially if they're first gen, helping them make that transition from being a college student to being in a professional environment, because this is a new experience for the new employee. And so it's, most of the folks who I interviewed had either not so positive experience, write down negative experience, or they had one supervisor that was great, but then they left and the next supervisor was, wasn't doing so well. And so that kind of reminded me of when I started a program. I went to UC Berkeley. I started a program at UC Berkeley where we worked with um, doing college access work with first generation low income high school kids. And so we wanted to hire recent college graduates who were first gen low income themselves. And I think a lot of what we learned in those first 2 years, that we had to really change the way we approached how we trained our staff. And so it was a lot more than just teaching them how to do financial aid applications, college admissions. We really had to teach them how to be self advocates for themselves professionally. So, and it meant us giving them proactive information and resources, not just about different jobs or job skills, but around graduate school and getting the resources to them for them to make their own decisions. But I forget who said earlier today, talking about going to graduate school, and you got dissuaded. And so we changed our approach, and it was, we now are wanting to push. So we said, we told our staff that we were gently twisting arms for them to consider graduate school, especially doctorate. So we wanted to see more people in doctoral programs. And I had one young advisor who went to a pretty tough school. She got into Berkeley as a freshman, graduated, but didn't have a lot of the self confidence, and so she was the advisor that I supervised. And when it came time to looking at graduate school, she was looking at graduate schools, graduate programs in California because her family was in California. And so I had a conversation with her about, because she was really interested in, I think it was Columbia. And so turns out that she was afraid of going out of state because she would be by herself. Her family was all going to be in Northern California. And so I just had a conversation, over coffee with her. I didn't really think about it too much. And it's like, you never know. Just kind of encourage her and, and really encourage her to consider Columbia. And she ended up going. After she graduated and came back, she told me about that conversation. It was like a 10-minute conversation that I honestly had forgotten about, but it was that 10 conversation that really got her to think about jumping out of her comfort zone and going to Columbia. Long story short, she just got her Ph.D. from UCLA, and I think is now got a job like at Penn State as a graduate researcher. And so, as a young African American woman from a low income school, were raised by her mother and grandmother, and all her family and all her support were up here in Northern California. But it just took a gentle nudge to kind of get her to go out, and now she's this incredible person that's kind of done is about to be continuing doing big things.
That's awesome. LT, is that your hand up?
Yeah, I'll just put myself in the queue to respond to Jose
Oh, yeah, go ahead.
and that fantastic story. I just wanted to say that student's like inclination is perfectly reasonable, and we have to remember that. Like, why would you want to leave your family? You know what I mean? If you don't want to, I mean, for some of us. So we have, what happens is that there are these other norms and values that are passed across, come across as like the expected thing, where it's perfectly reasonable to have doubts and want to stay close to your family. So I always want to put that out there, because sometimes our values, especially those of us who are poor, working class, are like represented as somehow unreasonable, and it's perfectly reasonable.
Right.
So I just wanted to put that out there. But
Yeah.
as we're using our social capital to help students adapt to new norms, I think that's what we're getting at, right? But we just,
Yeah.
I always want to like uplift the backgrounds that we come from.
Yeah, and LT, to that point, you pulled some heartstrings right there, just because it made me think about the notion of fear. I think about when I was in undergrad and even in grad school, and I would mention, oh, I don't think I can do that right now. Like, my finances are not in a position to go on this trip. Oh, why are you afraid? It's not fear, it's just my reality, right? So I think that you're right, there has to be more of a reverence and respect for that, especially now, and thinking about higher education. And as we have students who are far more debt adverse, we have to go to bat for higher ed a lot more, and really explain the why. Like, they're putting our feet to the fire, and rightfully so. What's going to be the return on investment? I'm hearing a lot more incoming students talk about that, and we have to be able to articulate that. We have to be able to say that, okay, this major these are some of the jobs for this, and we have to be more up to date within the job market, and understand what exists there. So we are far more challenged now by a new and more empowered wave of students who already have a level of agency, because they've been through the ringer, and we have to make certain that we're able to meet them. But yeah, LT, just that made me think about that fear that I've been made to feel guilty for having, when I'm like, I'm not afraid of anything. For me, it's responsibility.
These are good little quotes tonight, James Winfield, Dr. James Winfield. I am writing down your quotes. And Jose, I mean, to create just a whole spider web of network for students, and to use your social capital to open those doors and help students to feel confident, and now graduating PhDs. I mean, these are incredible stories, y'all. Incredible stories. Sarah, I saw your hand and I saw LT's hand, and Jose's off of mute. Whoever wants to go next, go next.
I was gonna say, after I graduated undergrad, I had always thought like, oh, I'm gonna go like international, go to a big city, and the reality was I could not leave. I needed to be within a certain distance from my family, because it's not that like, oh, okay, I could get back in a day, but I couldn't afford to get on a plane.
Yeah.
And that is what made my decision, was I needed to know that I could get back to them if there's something happened. I'm the oldest daughter, so you can imagine like, my responsibilities. And people thought that I was limiting myself, and I wasn't limiting myself. Those were my boundaries that I had. That was, like you said, James, like, that's the reality. And I got a lot of shade for it, and a lot of people who said, you're just afraid. I'm not afraid of anything. Like, that's not the issue. But it was really, it's taken so much time to look back and say, I remember that thought, knowing that that's why I was making the decision, but feeling really silly about it.
I think my next cricket shirt is I'm from Louisiana, so we would say, I ain't afraid of nothing. I ain't afraid of nothing. But that idea of fear that y'all are bringing up and being able to battle that narrative to say, I'm not afraid. This is my reality. I'm not afraid. I need to be able to get to my family quickly. I'm not afraid. I'm making choices that are different than you. And honestly, um, over a lot of barriers. And so, what resilience that LT wrote about in our first book about first gen professionals, but it's resilience that should not be weaponized, but you celebrate it, that you're not afraid and you are doing all these things in spite of some of this stuff, right? And so, what great stories. Jose, you were going to say something.
Yeah, I think y'all are bringing up a really great point, and I think it's something in advising, particularly when advising high school students in particular, I think, is that the advisors are are really guiding the student in what their framework is. And so it's the advisor who has defined what success means, what that, everything you all were talking about. And I see it happen so much. And so when we did training, and as I talk to different supervisors now, is really taking that perspective that you all were just talking about, and that not assigning what we define as success to that individual. And I think I've always operated under the guise that when we're advising, we're providing information, we're providing resources, we're providing different perspectives that the advisee may not know or may not have never heard about, but we're providing opportunities. But it's their decision what choice they're going to make. That's the best choice for them at whatever particular stage in life there was. And so I think for me, I did my master's degree, I think, in 2005, and I did pretty well about going into a doctorate program, but different things happen, and I didn't really understand it. And at that point, we talked about imposter syndrome, and I didn't think I was smart enough to go into a doctorate program, so I kind of psyched myself out of it. And it took me like another 15 years to actually be brave enough and jump in my 50s into a doctorate program. But it's a decision that I made that was right for me at that time. Thinking about it now, I should have gone back to school much, much earlier. I think I kept myself out because I didn't think that I could do a doctoral program. I just kind of psyched myself out because I always thought it was way too hard. It's for folks that are a lot smarter than I am. So, but I think it's when we have to be careful that when we give advice, that we're really, like you all were saying, we're providing folks with potential avenues that they have to decide if that's the right choice for them, for whatever situation they are or however they define success. And so it's like, for me, I'm in my late 50s. I got a good 10 years before I retire, so I'm like on the downhill end of it. And I recognize that I have a big privilege in that I can be really picky in what it is that I want to do and don't want to do. And so it's hard, especially if you're first gen, because you're so ingrained from when you're very little, that especially if you're low income, you're doing it for this community, or you're doing it for your parents, or you're doing it for that, and then it's the paycheck and it's the title, and it's it's just it's a lot.
There's a lot going on in the chat, y'all. A lot going on in the chat. A couple of questions for everybody to think about. I mean, we're running out of time. These conversations always go so fast, and I want to give Lear a chance here in a minute to talk about a better day. But LT put in the chat, I want to read this out loud because it is some like food for thought for us, is did you keep yourself out or were you kept out? What messages were you receiving and what barriers were you overcoming that made you think you couldn't do it? I look back on Whew, my little Cajun small town. And I was like one of the only ones in my senior class to go to college or to go away for college. I mean, I went away for college, which was unheard of. And I think about the pole vaulting I did over barriers. And I remember somebody, I think it was Jose, you were talking about, you didn't feel smart enough for a PhD program. It might be too hard. I'm going to tell you that I didn't do my PhD until I was employed at LSU, and they paid for the PhD, which I always am like, work at an institution that will pay you to do your PhD. But they wanted a GRE score. My GRE was 20 years old, and it was low, low, low. So I went to the professor. I had already matriculated through 12 hours. I went through the head of the program. I said, if I can call my regional institution and they send you my GRE for my master's, no matter how low it is, will you accept it? And he said, yes. And I was like, I'm so glad I had this meeting. I don't have to retake the GRE. I had already had a 4.0 in the matriculated hours. And I had to tell myself to believe in myself enough to go and talk to that professor. That professor opened a door for me that he didn't have to open. And I never felt so smart in my whole life. Not even when I was taking a statistics class. I felt smart going and asking for what I needed. And I felt powerful in that moment. But it was because a lot of people used their social capital on me that I was able then to turn around and say, okay, other people believed in me. I need to believe in myself, you know. And here I am several years later, right around this time, in August in 2012, I was walking across that stage and heard my daughter say, "We love you, Dr. Mama." And that's all I heard at the graduation. And I just am like, I'm so glad that they can stand where I'm at now and keep moving forward. You know, that's all I wanted to do. So, James, I want to give you the last word, and then I want to turn it over to Lear for a minute.
Yeah, I guess I'll just throw in just another, quick anecdote. Like just thinking about those memories, and Mira, I can connect with you on that. I had to bet on myself as well, in regards to like that standardized testing piece, and just kind of tout the fact that, hey, I can bring something to this program. Just really pushing for myself. And I had a phenomenal advisor, and that person looked out for me. From that point on, even till now. But for me, it was seeing my 3-year-old son out in the audience when I was walking across the stage. So him and my 5-year-old niece, like they are just happy. And they were just happy that I had a cool hat with a tassel. They didn't really understand anything
It is a
else.
cool hat.
But yeah, those moments, and just knowing that you're first gen, but they will not be, and you can pass that capital on to them. So if you're talking about full circle moments, not just for those that you're working with, those that you're connecting with in the field, let it go in your family as well. So making sure that
That's right.
that is something that is of priority as well.
That's awesome. James, you're inspirational, and I can't wait to meet you and give you a big old hug from Birmingham, Alabama. And thank you to LT, Jose, Sarah, Maria. Thank y'all for joining this conversation.